Good morning. Good morning. Last time we had a lot of mic trouble, so hopefully you can all hear me well. Thumbs up. Okay. This morning's text is very special to me. It is my call to ministry text. How I explain how God and I wrestled with the thought of me in ministry. And as I come to find out how God and I will always wrestle with the thought of me in ministry. And as every minister can probably tell you, there are quite a few moments in life when the sermon and the text that we're working on become our reality during that time. That it not only plays out in how we design and form the words which we speak to, but it actually physically plays out in our life during that time. And this is one of those times for me. Today I have two stories for you, so bear with me. It may seem very separate, but I will tie them together at the end. In my third year of seminary, I was required to take an ethics class with a teacher who I came to respect and enjoy a great deal. She was funny, a self-proclaimed hippie, with hair teased out to here, socks with her sandals, beads everywhere, huge big profile glasses. She was interesting to listen to, and she loved it when we challenged her. For our final paper, we had two choices. Your paper could be on HIV and AIDS, or the war in the Middle East that we, the United States, were engaged in. I chose the war as my topic and added a little twist. I, at the time, had full access to a sniper team sitting on the front lines. There were 13 men and women who varied in age, faith, race, and time served. I received this access because one of my very best friends was their team leader. My quest was to know how a soldier of faith reconciled war and killing. I had put together a document of about 20 to 25 questions that they were to answer via email after it was approved by their commanding officer. I had chose 5 out of the group to interview. 1 was the team leader. 2 were first-time soldiers. 1 who had a long family history of serving, and 2 seasoned veterans. Out of the group, 4 were Christian, 1 was an atheist. He was my baseline, so to speak. For the paper, my research required me to read many books on how soldiers were trained for combat, as well as how they integrated back into society. I also read blog after blog written by returning soldiers and their experiences in the field back at home. Something that I discovered is that it is critical to the training of a soldier to be able to do what we call other the enemy. By othering the enemy, I mean to not think of them as a person, a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, a sister, or a brother. They can have no name, no identity, other than enemy. Once the soldier recognizes the enemy as any of those things, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to kill them. Why? Because it allows the soldier and the enemy to identify with one another, to recognize each other as human and sharing in a bond. Dehumanizing them is imperative for war. If you recognize them as a human and can draw parallels with them in your own life, you become empathetic towards them. In order to hate and kill, fear needs for them to be nothing like the enemy, not on any level. There has to be an us and a them. No empathy, no compassion for the other, the stranger, the enemy. My second story comes from the book we've been working through over the last 10, 11 weeks, The 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life by Karen Armstrong. In the book, she tells a story in chapter 11 about a young woman named Christina who has a disturbing but incredibly impactful dream about helping the abandoned children of Vietnam. The dream is explained very vividly like this. Naked children were running down a dirt road, fleeing from napalm bombing. One of the girls had a look in her eyes that implored me to pick her up and protect her and take her to safety. Above the escaping children was a brilliant white light that contained the word Vietnam. The book goes on to say that from that moment, Christina was convinced, in a way she could not understand, that it was her destiny to go to Vietnam and that one day she would work with the children there. This dream made such an impact on her because at the age of 12, she became a child of the streets of Dublin, sleeping in parks, in public places when it was cold, hungry, alone, abused, a child abandoned. Years later, on her first trip to Vietnam, Christina was watching two little girls who were destitute playing in the streets, in the dirt. One of them smiled up at her, reached out her hand to hold it. Christina was immediately overcome with memories so painful, she tried to walk away. She wanted no more grief, no more involvement. Yet at the same time, she was saying this to herself. There is no difference. There is no difference between an Irish gutter and a Vietnamese gutter. And at the end of the day, they are the same. The stranger she saw was herself, mirrored in this child. And that made all the difference in the world. She realized that there was no us and them. At the end of the day, they are the same. All her pain was their pain. All their pain was hers. If one suffers, we all suffer. That was her moment of recognition. In a world where we are bombarded by images via wireless internet, speeding into our homes, into our smartphones, which we hold in the palm of our hand on a continual basis, we become numb, indifferent, and faced with the amount of pain and suffering we see on a daily basis, we insulate ourselves. We wall ourselves off to the pain of others. We compartmentalize it into ours and theirs. We think, but I am only one person. This is too much to bear. What can I do? What do you expect me to do? I've got my own issues. What Karen Armstrong suggests is a godly resolution. Make a place for the other in your life, in your heart, in your prayers. Recognize that if one suffers, we all suffer. Cultivate concern for others. You don't have to travel across the globe to make this happen. She's not asking all of us to book a ticket to Vietnam, to Central America, to Africa, to Asia. She's telling you to look at your own doorstep. Pain and suffering exist there. It may exist in your own home, your own backyard, your own extended family, within these four walls. We need to stop viewing those that have a different worldview, a different life experience, a different faith, a different pain and suffering from ourselves as separate from our shared humanity. We all have the same need for connection, the same need to be known and understood for who we are, not who someone thinks we are. These two short stories show us how we separate ourselves into us and them. However, what is different between these two stories? Can you tell me? What's the distinct difference between the first story and the second? The difference is that in the second story, the woman got close enough to see herself in the little girl. And the us and them melted. She shared the pain and suffering of another. She shared in our humanity. Today's text mirrors all of this. It mirrors the struggle of Jacob as well as the struggle of each and every single one of us. Maybe not right now, but maybe tomorrow, or maybe yesterday. It may be a struggle you're not even conscious of. In our text, Jacob wrestles with a stranger. He wrestles and holds on to this stranger all night long, trying to work this out. He clings to this stranger, refusing to let go. And it's both a match of spiritual and physical wrestling. It represents the battle that has raged between Jacob and his brother Esau from the moment of conception in the womb. The text says they fought so in the womb they were likely to have crushed one another. And upon birth, one was holding onto the heels of another, almost like trying to pull him back. No, me first. They are the enemy to one another, Jacob and Esau. Yet they are part of each other. They are a mirror image of light and dark. Just like the enemy among us is a mirror image of ourselves of light and dark. The struggle also represents Jacob's struggle with God as he prayed that night, as he beseeched him in a never-ending prayer, and it also represents the struggle Jacob has within himself. Because residing in each and every one of us is an enemy within, a dark, a light. This text tells us that the battle that he fought gave him an unexpected blessing and showed him there was something far greater on the horizon, just as it does for us. How many times do we struggle with God, with our faith, with doubt, with someone in our lives or within ourselves, only to find out as we move through it that it was a greater blessing of knowing someone else or oneself even deeper, and that something greater was about to happen. Scripture tells us there's always a great struggle before a great moment where the tide turns. For Jacob, forgiveness and reconciliation with his brother was what happened. But what great healing do you imagine could come from any of us here today if the boundaries of them and us were to disappear? There was no enemy, but just shared humanity. I know it is a tremendously lofty ideal, especially when we continuously inflict pain and suffering upon one another in the name of us and them. in yourself? What great healing have you experienced in the reconciliation of a relationship? Whether it was with yourself or the enemy or with God. If we face the struggle within ourselves, with God, and the perceived stranger among us, what would happen? Do you think there'd be more of a negative outcome or a positive? Do you think there would be a blessing like there was for Jacob? The story is a story to tell us that in the great struggling, there will be great change, and it will be a blessing, and new things on the horizon will be greater than you could even imagine. If you can share in your own humanity and wrestle with the stranger. Compassion for others and the recognition that the other you perceive is no different than you is a turning point for action in your faith. Have you ever stopped to think that when you think of someone else as the enemy and the other, they in turn are thinking of you in the same way? It's a twist of fate that those that we do not understand and think stranger, in turn do not understand us and think stranger. You are the enemy as well. Embrace one another's pain. And when you do, it in turn embraces your own. And just like for Christina, there is great healing on the horizon in that shared humanity. Compassion is to be cultivated. Karen Armstrong talks about it in her book over and over again. It is a practice. It is a habit. It is not something you just wake up and have. It is a constant awakening. It is a sign of great strength and not weakness. Yet our culture tells us what? It is weak to show compassion. It is weak to love your enemies. It is weak to embrace those and forgive those. But it is not. It is great strength to stand in the face of that and say, I do not understand, and I want to tear down that boundary, and I want to know you. In all of our stories today, except the first, there is great moments of recognition. In the first story on the soldiers, that moment of recognition cannot come in the battlefield because the cost is their life. That moment comes when they come home and they integrate back into society. And then it becomes an ethical, moral, faith, philosophical, theological discussion within themselves as they wrestle to understand what they did in the name of them and us. And I know this because I know the team I interviewed. I know the answers to the questions I asked them. I saw the anger in the words. I had them curse at me on paper. You could feel the anger come off of it. These are things they couldn't think about. It was imperative for us from them. But our survival does not depend on us and them. Our survival depends on a shared humanity. I leave you with this quote. A human being is part of the whole we call the universe. We are apart in limited time and space. He, the human being, experiences himself, his thoughts, and his feelings as something separate from the rest of everything and everyone else. A kind of delusion of his subconscious and conscious mind. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. That's from Albert Einstein. May God continue to work out our faith and our compassion in our shared humanity.